I'm Eric Parker. This morning on CT21, guilty on all counts as Derek Chauvin sits in a Minnesota jail awaiting sentencing in the death of George Floyd. We're looking at the impact of that verdict. And relief comes to restaurants and bars as the governor announces he's repealing restrictions put in place at the start of the pandemic. And an excuse to hold off on mowing your lawn, how bees benefit from what's known as No Mow May. It's all this Sunday, April 25th. CT21 starts right now.
From Channel 3, this is Connecticut's most watched current affairs program, CT21, with Eric Parker, sponsored by Hartford Healthcare.
Good morning. The verdict came down on Tuesday evening. Guilty on all counts. Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin answering for his actions that caused the death of George Floyd. Shortly after the judge read the jury's findings, Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison spoke about the verdict and what he believes is needed going forward.
We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it.
So what impact will this case and the conviction of Derek Chauvin have in our nation's history? Joining us to talk about that is Dr. Monica Bell. She's a professor of both law and sociology at Yale. Dr. Bell, thank you for being with us. And I want to start with what the Attorney General just said in that quote. He says social transformation is what is needed. Could this be the first step of that?
So I think this verdict could be an important step, I think, in renewing the hope of people who had essentially lost hope. And there, I'm particularly talking about Black people and activists. However, I think the first steps are occurring long before this verdict. I think we just really need to put this verdict in context. So it is a moment of some sort of accountability, a thin sort of accountability for a particular police officer. But the longer story is with the movements who were organizing before this, the people out in the streets.
And I know you say it's a long play, and I know I read your law review article from 2017 in the Yale Law Journal. And for people not in the law business, that's a big deal to be published there. And to have what you wrote in there was that there's an obligation to treat people with dignity and respect. So it's more than just, like you say, one police officer and one assault, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's far more than that. And what I really want to elevate about the Derek Chauvin case is that the verdict was about only the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. It's not about anything that preceded that particular aspect of the interaction. And there are many injustices in all of those moments leading up to those 9 minutes and 29 seconds.
Yeah, I saw more with the Attorney General from Minnesota, who will be on 60 Minutes tonight. And he talked about the fact that there was that whole interaction trying to get him in the police car. Mr. Chauvin basically freaked out when that happened, and that led to the confrontation. Is that part of your point, is that we need to look at that other treatment and not just the assault?
So, yes, I think we also need to think about how many criminal laws. Why do we have 4 officers responding to a call about an allegedly counterfeit $20 bill? Why was a gun immediately pulled on George Floyd when the car was pulled over? And you could see the terrified look in his eyes. Why did the police view this area as one in which they needed to use a particular sort of force at all? Why would the police be called about this type of concern where there's no violence and no kind of a potential bodily harm to anyone, as opposed to someone else, some other sort of state resource? So there's a lot to rethink. And that's what Keith Ellison was talking about with respect to social transformation.
Now, I know in Connecticut, it's exceedingly rare for a police officer to be charged for on-duty conduct. You're the expert in this area. Is it similarly rare across the country? And what should we take from the fact that this was not just a charge, but a conviction?
Yes. So it is almost impossible because of doctrines that are built into our law, such as qualified immunity. Of course, Connecticut has tried to modify that, but there are many just norms and policies that keep police officers from being convicted for wrongdoing. And what I want to really elevate here is that in the case, the prosecutor, like in the Derek Chauvin case, the prosecutor made clear that he didn't view policing as being on trial here. Instead, it was a very extreme, so the 9 minutes and 29 seconds, it was a very particular sort of violation that was publicly brutal, that was caught on video. But most of the police brutality and violence, and really, what I talk about in that article you mentioned, legal estrangement, though, and kind of senses of exclusion that run toward Black people in part because of policing, that stuff's not caught on video, and most of it is legal.
So then what's the message for police officers? Certainly there's many men and women who sign up to be public servants and do so in their best interest of their communities, who act in an honorable way in doing it. So what do you hope they take, and even the bad actors, what do you hope all police officers take from this verdict and from the movement as a whole?
Yeah. So I hope what they take from the verdict is that this work is only starting now, right? So I think, a clear, sort of an obvious answer would be, don't use excessive force against people, and you could actually be held accountable for that and sent to prison. So, that's one message. But I hope the broader message is a revisitation of the basic obligations of police officers, how to stop people, how to treat people. And more than that, rethinking their role. I want police to ask themselves, should we be responding to some of these types of calls that we get that are essentially about nothing? Or can we help other people invest in alternative resources to deal with that? So this is a project for everyone. It isn't movement versus police or anything like that. It is instead a request for all of us to rethink how large of a role policing unnecessarily plays in our day-to-day interactions.
So what's next? What do you, supporters of the Black Lives Matter and the police movement, what should they be looking for as the next steps?
Yeah, so I think there are several. So one is pushing on the federal government. So right now we have a Democratic administration again, and usually what that means is, as we are seeing now in Minneapolis, the Department of Justice engaging in certain sorts of investigations for unconstitutional conduct in particular places. In order to avoid the types of incidents that lead to those sorts of investigations, police departments should be re-examining their policies and training so that they could produce less, like George Floyd will happen again because we have a certain style of policing in our nation. But I think in terms of activists, and in terms of actors who aren't within police departments, because I think that's where most of the work is going to be, keep pushing. Don't view the verdict as a moment of justice. View it instead as a particular moment of accountability, and instead refocus our energies on building that social transformation. So that means organizing in community groups to help produce networks of safety so we don't have to call the police about every little thing. That means really reconstructing our relationships to each other, not being afraid, not being afraid of each other. And I think there's a lot of work that has to be done there as well.
And certainly a lot more to say about this topic as well. Dr. Monica Bell from Yale, we appreciate you being with us. And I encourage people to check out your law review article, which is from 3 years ago or 4 years ago now. Certainly interesting stuff. And hopefully we'll talk to you again. Thanks for being with us. Coming up later in our program, No Mow May. Why you might want to consider leaving that lawnmower in the garage or shed for just a little while longer. And up next, getting back to business, we're talking about plans to ease and then eliminate pandemic restrictions that have kept businesses like restaurants and bars from operating at 100%. We'll be right back.